This is going to be a good one. We always save the last thing for last because our mommies told us to do that, right? So this is going to be looking at something that I thought would be fascinating for you guys to hear about. So beginning of the day, we had Seth Siegel tell us that drip irrigation is the solution for water problems. Shelley Cartwright is here. She's the Deputy General Manager of an irrigation district in California, not a water utility. It's the largest irrigation district in the world. So your food probably does come from there. We don't know for a fact, but it probably does. So now the question is, why is that relevant to us? And it is because it turns out that California is going through the drought of a millennium, is what people are telling us. The Westlands Water District's farmers, over the last 10 to 20 years, have changed their crops, have applied drip irrigation, and have done everything that people are telling people to do. And now they are looking at the face of a big drought, and they don't know where exactly they're to go. But I'm not going to tell her entire story. We've been about solutions, and what I'm basically telling you is that Shelley is going to tell you that many of these solutions have been done, and the question is, now what? And you're supposed to tell her the answer.
Thank you, and Dr. Lal stole a lot of my punchlines, so forgive me if I'm repetitive. So my name is Shelley Cartwright. I'm the Deputy General Manager of External Affairs for Westlands Water District. Just a disclaimer for our legal purposes. As Dr. Lal said, California experiences water variability. We had infrastructure projects that were built to adapt and manage that variability, but our water supply has been changing. More frequent drought, higher temperatures has affected the ability of the projects to function. As you heard a lot today, infrastructure across the country is aging. There are parts that have lost up to 60% of capacity. And on top of that, we've had layers of regulation that have really hampered the ability of the projects to function. So I'm going to talk about some of the solutions that our district and our farmers have implemented, how they have allowed us, enabled us to survive the past 20 years, what we're currently doing, and then what we're looking to for the future. So with that, let's dive in. I'm going to talk about water for agriculture, specifically water for California agriculture. And I know it's almost 5 p.m., and why should you care? Well, only 2% of our population are involved in the agricultural space. That's 2% of the population provide food for the remaining 98% of us. On top of that, California produces over 200 different types of crops. For 40 of those, these crops are, California produces more than any other state. For 20% of those, or for 20 crops, sorry, California produces 99% of the US production. So if you consume food that was grown in the United States, if you had grapes in a fruit salad today, if you had almonds or almond milk, if you had raisins, if you had garlic in your lunch, there's a really good chance, there's 99% chance that that came from California. So California agriculture is important. The agricultural industry itself is really important. The United States is the largest agricultural exporter in the world. California is consistently the number one producing state. What that means on a local level, in Fresno and Kings County, where Westlands Water District is located, is that's 1 in 9 and 1 in 6 jobs are on the farm jobs. And what does that mean? That means that these are people who are actually like dirt on their boots. This is not including those who are engaged in the processing and packaging industries. This doesn't count for those who are in the transportation industries or shipping and beyond. So this is really impactful to the local economy as well as to the larger economy. US agriculture and related industries accounts for about $1 trillion in the GDP. This is really based on $130 billion, a little over that, of agricultural products. Again, on the local level, in Westlands, our growers produce about $2 billion worth of food and fiber a year, and this accounts to about $5 billion of economic activity. So we've talked a lot about the instability and the drought in California. As Dr. Lull hinted at, part of the reason that we've been able to produce that amount of economic activity is because of the investments we've made in water conservation early on. We are the largest agricultural water district in California, potentially in the world. But the only way we've been able to survive is to implement these conservative solutions early on. Let's talk a little bit about our water supply challenges. The water falls in California typically in the fall and the winter. The water is needed typically in the spring and the summer. And that's a graph depicting that. This is the average variability from year to year. So you can see that water variability in California is not a foreign concept. This is something that we are familiar with. We built water projects to try to manage this variability. We are currently experiencing sustained drought and higher temperatures that rival or exceed anything we've seen before. And again, as with aging and inadequate water infrastructure and regulations, we aren't able to manage the system like we once were. So the water falls at the wrong time. It falls really in unpredictable ways that we can't always understand. But then on top of that, it falls in the wrong place. So this is a graph of the average annual precipitation in California. And as you can see, the water tends to fall in the northern and eastern sections of California. Westlands is actually located in that center dry spot in California. So I'm going to pause here quickly because you may be thinking, if you're still awake, that why do we have one of the largest agricultural areas, not only in the country, but in the world, based in an area that receives less than 10% or 10 inches of rain a year? Well, this area is one of the 5 Mediterranean climates in the world. This area has extremely fertile soil. So this unique combination of temperature and soil and overall climate has enabled our growers to generate higher yields, generate better produce, better product with less water and less fertilizer. So to put that in perspective, the average acre of tomatoes in the nation typically generates around, we'll say, 40 tons per acre. In Fresno and Kings County, our farmers are able to generate 50 or 54 tons per acre. This is a significant increase in the tons per acre, and it's because of the unique conditions within this area. So how do we make sure that this water has adequate water? Or how do we make sure this area has adequate water? Well, there were two large statewide water infrastructure projects that were built that essentially capture the water where it falls, transports it, pumps it through the delta where a lot of the natural water collects, and then moves it south to these drier areas and to larger communities like LA and San Diego. But as we've said, and as you heard a lot about, the infrastructure is aging. It is no longer able to function at design capacity. It is also not able to accommodate the changes that we're experiencing. We are seeing higher temperatures in the last 40 years. We're also expecting to see the increase of drought and flood. And on top of that, the hydrologic system itself is changing. So we're seeing upstream uses increase and higher requirements for water to meet the same water quality standards. So basically, there's less water coming down through the system, and it's requiring more water to actually meet the requirements, the water quality requirements. On top of that, we have regulation. So this is a graph that depicts the average water supply of the district and similar contractors as a result of various state and federal regulations. The main point of this is that each time there's another regulation that gets put in place, our water supply decreases. And while I would love to sit here and tell you how wonderful and thriving our ecosystem is, unfortunately, our listed species and our critically endangered species are still at risk, and they're in a very precarious position given the climate changes that we're seeing. So as a result of all of these factors, our water supply has become very variable and unpredictable, and it has recently seen a significant decline. That's resulted in an increase in groundwater pumping. This pink or kind of purplish line here shows the groundwater pumping in the district. At the beginning of the graph, it's very high because this was before we received any surface water allocation from the Central Valley Project. Once we began receiving surface water, our groundwater pumping, or the groundwater pumping in the district, significantly decreased. You see an increase in the 90s, and that's about the first time that the district adopted its first groundwater management plan. And I know you heard earlier about the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in California. That's something that was enacted in 2014 and is going into effect as we speak. That will significantly limit the amount of pumping that's available not only in the district but across California. But unsustained, unregulated groundwater pumping can lead to subsidence. What you see in this first picture is subsidence that has occurred in the district. The first picture on the left is a 50-year period from 1925 to 52-year period to 1977. And this is before we received surface water allocation. The second picture is after we received surface water allocation. You can see it's a 25-year period, but it's still about half of what we saw before. So it's about a quarter because 25 years rather than 52. Anyways, it's not perfect, but we're hoping in the future we can get it down to zero. What are the other impacts of this low water supply? Well, this is a picture in a year in which the district received 100% of its allocation, and the second picture is when we received 0% of our allocation. When we don't receive surface water, we aren't able to plant our crops. To put this again in perspective, 1 acre of land in the district is able to produce roughly 50,000 9-ounce salads. The difference in the acreage that was planted, if they were all planted with lettuce, the difference between these two pictures is roughly 7.8 billion salads. That is lunch for the entire population of the world between 2 years in which we didn't receive our water allocation. Unfortunately, we're seeing more and more land fallowed every year. It's part of the economics of an unpredictable water supply. Growers have had to switch crops and utilize other methods to make the economics of their operations work. So, as Dr. Lal mentioned earlier, our farmers have switched crops, and you now see many more permanent crops, which are typically almonds or grapes, which are these higher margin, higher value crops. The reason that we see more permanent plantings in the district is because this allows the economics of farming operations to work. This is one of the only ways that we've been able to survive wet years, is by making sure that we have enough money and revenue generated to be able to survive the dry years, is to make sure you have enough money and revenue generated in the dry years, or in the wet years. You get it. So I'm not saying that fallowing acreage or changing crop types or groundwater pumping are not solutions. They are solutions. They are something that should be in your toolbox, that should be utilized in a thoughtful approach, as any solution goes. It takes the good, the bad, and every aspect or every tool that we can use. But unregulated, unrestricted, they essentially lead to the loss of domestic agriculture. So what have we done to stop the loss of domestic agriculture and to protect our agricultural water? Unsurprisingly, our biggest focus was on water conservation. So the district invested in a fully enclosed and metered system. So there's over 1,000 miles of underground pipe in the district with over 3,000 miles. The district today remains one of the only, if not the only, agricultural water district that has a fully enclosed system. And what this means is that there are no irrigation districts. There are no open canals in the district. A drop of water enters the district, and there's a 90% chance that it doesn't see the light of day until it comes out as a juicy tomato or a pomegranate or an almond. On top of that, the district has some really creative farmers who have moved all of our irrigation technology into efficient irrigation. So the district, to encourage this to occur and to support the farmers in the district, have created a couple programs that help finance that transition. So we provide financing and, in some instances, actual funding for the improvement of irrigation systems and the improvement of energy efficiencies in those systems. Our growers also apply only the precise amount of water to the crops that's needed. Essentially, this is called the irrigation scheduling based on the real-time evapotranspiration crop data. Essentially, what we see is a 90 to 98% efficiency in the application of water to the crops. So 90 to 98% of the water that is actually applied to the crops is taken up by those crops. So those are the solutions that we've utilized in the past. Today, we are looking and implementing other solutions that we're hoping will continue to help us survive and improve our future. So in California, as I talked about, there are a lot of regulations, there are a lot of factors that affect our water supply. The Endangered Species Act is one of the most limiting regulations, or I guess laws and the subsequent regulations that has limited our water supply. Unfortunately, the way that we've seen it work so far is that we haven't seen a measurable impact to the species, a measurable improvement to the species. So the district has recently completed a habitat restoration. It's one of the, in a location that's very critical for the species. But we've also joined the state, the federal government, and a number of water agencies to commit to completing over 45,000 acres of habitat restoration in the next 8 years. Ensuring that we have a resilient and robust ecosystem and native species is essential to ensuring the water for any use in California. On top of that, the district has taken some land out of production. I know that's a little faux pas in a lot of the agricultural conversations, but it has allowed us to reallocate surface water to the remaining farms that stay in production. To date, we have sold over 13,000 acres, and we have about 21,000 under option for solar development. We currently have about 1,500 megawatts of solar capacity in the district, which is roughly equates to providing energy for over 260,000 homes. We're also putting new storage and aquifer storage and recharge facilities on this land. So rather than letting this land just lay fallow, we're putting it to other uses that can ensure and protect our water supply. So the next few slides, the last few slides, are solutions that will hopefully not only benefit us, but will also fundamentally change the way that water works in California. So I've talked a lot about the inability of regulations to improve the system. So what we're trying to do is, with the federal government, with the state government, this is really Governor Newsom's been kind of spearheading this, but with a number of other agencies, is change the way that regulations are applied in California. This is going to benefit water districts, but our goal and hope is that ultimately it's going to benefit the ecosystem as a whole. If we can change the system so that it can operate to the real-time biological needs of the species while also restoring the functionality of the water system, then ag wins, technology wins, the tech industry is there, and the people will still be able to have access to an adequate, reliable water supply. On top of that, unsurprisingly, we're trying to restore our infrastructure. We're looking to a lot of the federal funding that was discussed, but we are wanting to make sure that our infrastructure system is restored and able to design or to function as designed. But on top of that, we need new infrastructure. We need to make sure that as we see more drought and more flooding, we can capture the water when it's available for use in those dry years. So those are really the solutions we're looking to in the future. And they're not just going to benefit agriculture. They're not just going to benefit the domestic production. They're going to ensure that we have a viable system for everybody in California. And hopefully these are solutions that can be applied elsewhere to really improve our water system across the country. So, thank you for listening. I'm smiling because you heard earlier from Mr. Palumbo, who's the Bureau of Reclamation, and I talked to him a lot about the challenges that we have with funding, and there's obviously a difference between financing and funding. And for some of these major projects, the kind of handshake agreement is 30% will come from the state, 30% will come from these local agencies, and 30% will come from the federal government. But currently, the way that the money is set up at the federal government is that it's reimbursable, meaning that the local entity will ultimately have to repay that money. So our hope is not to have, we have about 600 farmers, or I guess farming operations in our district. Our hope is that these 600 entities don't have to pay for their proportionate share of 2/3 of, I think the infrastructure numbers in California are north of like $30 billion if you're looking at all the currently projected projects. But our hope is that it'll be 1/3 of these major projects that will come from the ratepayers and the growers.